Welcome to the Working Thesis. I am Maia, and today we are kicking off a brand new series we call the Agent Era. Over the coming episodes, we are going to be thinking out loud, zooming out from the low-level mechanical tutorials to look at the massive strategic picture. Where is all this heading? What happens to the economy when the agentic loops we've been building actually start running the world? To ground this, we have to start with a deal that completely shattered the industry's traditional mental models.
Right. If you want to understand the true gravity of the AI landscape right now, you just have to look at what happened on June 16th, 2026. SpaceX, yes, Elon Musk's rocket company, paid about $60 billion in an all-stock deal to acquire Cursor, the AI coding tool made by Anysphere. On the surface, a rocket manufacturer buying a developer tool seems completely unhinged, but the context makes it the most fascinating strategic move of the decade.
Exactly, because SpaceX had already merged with Musk's AI lab, xAI, back in February 2026. This means SpaceX already owned a frontier model, Grok. They literally already had the brain. But shortly after that merger, by the end of March 2026, all 11 of xAI's co-founders had walked out the door. So here's a company that possesses a world-class reasoning engine, yet they still fork over $60 billion to buy a coding harness. Why would you do that?
It is the ultimate tell. It shows us exactly where the durable value actually lies. If you already have the brain in the jar, why buy the jar? The answer is that the brain alone isn't enough. As of 2026, and still evolving rapidly, the market is violently waking up to the reality that the raw model is just one layer of a much deeper stack. Today, we are unpacking why the harness became the ultimate prize. A quick, honest note before we start. This is a thinking out loud series about where AI agents are heading. It is exploration and opinion, not advice of any kind.
We will flag the difference between what is actually shipping today and where we think things are going. This is a 2026 snapshot, and it is evolving fast. So treat it as a map, not a forecast, and go explore for yourself. To really understand that $60 billion price tag, my read is that we have to look at the new technology stack in its entirety. It cleanly breaks down into 4 distinct layers: silicon, model, harness, and surface. For the first few years of the AI boom, all the oxygen, all the hype, and all the venture capital went to the bottom 2 layers. Everyone was asking, who has the GPUs and who is training the smartest baseline model?
And that obsession made total sense when models were incredibly scarce and distinctly tiered. If you had the smartest model, you won the market. But fast forward to where we are now, and the top 2 layers, the harness and the surface, are where all the economic gravity is shifting. The harness is the agentic loop, the tools, the memory architectures, the system that actually turns raw probabilistic reasoning into deterministic, useful work. The surface is the distribution, the IDE, the app, the operating system, where the user actually sits and stares at a screen.
Right. If the model is the brain setting the theoretical reasoning ceiling, the harness is the body. It sets the efficiency floor and dictates the breadth of what is actually possible in the physical or digital world. You can have the smartest brain in the universe, but if it has no hands to type, no memory to remember what happened yesterday, and no access to your local files, it cannot do anything for you.
That is exactly the brutal truth SpaceX realized. They had Grok. They owned the silicon and the model. But Cursor owned the developers. Cursor had the workflow, the context, the daily surface area where people actually lived and breathed code. Cursor built the best body. By buying Cursor, SpaceX bought the user relationship and the context engine, the 2 things Grok alone could never give them.
This brings us to a somewhat controversial thesis, but one I think is undeniably becoming true. Frontier models are becoming substitutable. I am not saying they're all exactly the same or that the benchmark wars are completely over, but the gap between the very best proprietary model and the open weights alternatives has closed so dramatically that, for most business tasks, they are functionally interchangeable. When brains become commodities, the value inevitably migrates.
It is the classic, unavoidable economic principle. When one layer of the tech stack commoditizes, the value violently flows to the adjacent layers. Because the reasoning ceiling has somewhat stabilized, you don't necessarily win the market by having a model that is 3% smarter on a benchmark. You win by having a harness that integrates perfectly into the user's life and understands their specific, messy, highly contextual reality.
Which perfectly explains the frantic scramble we are seeing among the major AI labs right now. If your business model was just, we will rent you API access to a really smart brain, you're in a very precarious position. You are essentially selling a substitutable utility, like electricity. To defend your margin, you either have to drop your API prices to zero, or you have to build a proprietary harness that locks people into your ecosystem.
And that dynamic is forcing everyone to pick a lane. You either try to own the entire stack vertically, or you strategically open source parts of it to destroy your competitors' margins. It is a brutal game of 4D chess, and we are seeing two completely different archetypal strategies play out in real time as the giants try to secure the periphery.
Let's look at those two archetypes, because they are diametrically opposed. On one side, we have the commoditize your complement strategy. OpenAI completely shocked the market when they open-sourced Codex. They gave away the harness for free. It is a brilliant, aggressive move. By making the coding harness open and ubiquitous, they drive massive volume back to their paid API and their proprietary models.
Exactly. They are basically saying, we don't need to own the IDE. We just want everyone, everywhere, using our brain to power their open tools. On the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have Anthropic. They took the classic Apple approach. They kept Claude Code completely closed and vertically integrated. They tuned the harness specifically for the Claude model, aiming for a premium, tightly coupled, highly secure experience.
It is a fascinating divergence in philosophy. OpenAI's bet is that an open harness will become the inevitable standard, and they can monetize the compute at the center of it all. Anthropic's bet is that you cannot build a truly reliable enterprise-grade agent unless you co-design the model and the harness together in a closed loop.
And this division isn't just about software architecture. It is fundamentally about trust and data. A closed, integrated system can promise tighter security guarantees for sensitive enterprise context, while an open harness lets hackers, tinkerers, and startups plug into anything. But while OpenAI and Anthropic are fighting a bloody war over the model and the harness, there is one player quietly dominating every single layer.
We have to talk about Microsoft. If you step back and look closely, they are the only company sitting comfortably at all four layers of the stack. Down at the silicon layer, they have their custom Cobalt and Maia chips. They are no longer completely dependent on external suppliers to keep their margins intact. That is a massive structural advantage before you even boot up a computer.
Then you move up to the model layer. At Build 2026, Microsoft revealed they aren't just an OpenAI wrapper anymore. They launched 7 of their own in-house MAI models, like Maia, Thinking One, and Maia Code, One Flash. They are building their own brains to reduce dependency. Then, at the harness layer, they have the entire Copilot engine orchestrating the agents.
And finally, the surface layer, which might be their biggest, most unassailable moat of all. They own Windows, they own GitHub, they own VS Code, they own Microsoft Office. They don't have to convince you to download a new app, change your habits, or learn a new UI to use their agent. They just wake the agent up inside the software you already have to use for 8 hours a day.
It is an incredibly formidable position. When you control the operating system in the code repository, you don't just own the distribution, you own the ground truth data. The model can see everything you do natively. Microsoft doesn't have to fight to acquire the context. The context is already living and breathing on their servers.
If we step back and look at the history of technology booms, there is a recurring analogy that fits perfectly here, but I want to push it a bit further. It's the classic gold rush. In a gold rush, a few people get incredibly rich finding a giant nugget. That's training a breakthrough frontier model. But it's risky, wildly expensive, and unpredictable.
The durable money is never in the panning. The durable money is in selling the picks, the shovels, and running the general store. In the agent era, the picks and shovels are the harness tools, the memory systems, the orchestration frameworks, the tool buses like MCP. And the general store is the surface. the platform that aggregates the users and sells the subscriptions.
And that brings us full circle to the SpaceX and Cursor deal. Cursor isn't a new model. It is the best pick and shovel in the world for developers, and it has successfully built a general store where millions of developers hang out every single day. $60 billion isn't a valuation of the code they wrote. It's a valuation of the workflow they own.
My read on this is that we will see this pattern repeat aggressively in other industries. The companies that win the next decade won't necessarily be the ones training the smartest LLMs from scratch. They will be the ones that build the best harnesses for specific professions, law, medicine, design, and seamlessly integrate them into the daily surfaces those professionals already use.
That really is the crux of it. Value lives in the periphery around the loop, not just inside the model itself. The harness owns the user's intent. When I type a command, I am trusting the harness to route it, to format it, to give the model the right context, and to verify the output. That trust is incredibly sticky. Here is me thinking out loud, looking just a bit over the horizon. If the model is truly substitutable, then the company that owns the harness essentially owns the future of the operating system.
This next part is speculation, but picture a Tuesday morning in 2031. Imagine an architect designing a massive skyscraper. They aren't switching between 5 different apps or manually picking which LLM to use. The architect's harness is the studio environment itself. It listens to their voice, looks at their sketches, and automatically routes the structural math to a cheap open-source model, routes the aesthetic 3D rendering to a heavy proprietary model, and routes the local permit checks to a hyper-local database agent.
Exactly. The harness owns the relationship with the architect. The models themselves are completely invisible to the user. They're just interchangeable commodities spinning up and down in the background like server instances. The architect doesn't care if it's Grok or Claude or an MAI model doing the math. They only care that the harness delivered the blueprint. Whoever builds that architectural harness captures all the value.
It is a profound shift from who is the smartest to who is the most useful. The brain in a jar is a fascinating scientific achievement, but a body that can actually help you do your job and hide the complexity of the models from you, that is a generational product, and the market is finally pricing that distinction accordingly.
Let's quickly recap what we covered today. The AI technology stack has 4 distinct layers: silicon, model, harness, and surface. Because models are converging and becoming substitutable, the economic value is migrating rapidly away from the brain, moving out to the harness and the surface.
We saw this crystallized perfectly when SpaceX paid $60 billion for Cursor, despite already owning Grok. We saw Microsoft aggressively secure their position across all 4 layers, while OpenAI and Anthropic take fundamentally different open versus closed bets on the harness itself to protect their margins.
And the big takeaway is that when brains commoditize, whoever owns the daily surface and the workflow data wins. The durable money is in the picks, the shovels, and the general store.
But this raises a huge, unavoidable question. If the harness is so incredibly valuable, why are we only seeing these massive valuations and breakthroughs in coding tools? Why hasn't this level of automation revolutionized every other white-collar job yet?
That is exactly what we're going to explore next time. Coding wasn't special because it's the most important job. It was special because it had 2 specific, unique properties. Next episode, we unpack the 2 gates and why your AI learned to code before it learned to plan your vacation. See you then.
And that is us thinking out loud for today. If this gave you a clearer map of where the agent era is heading, do us a favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps more curious people find the show.
We are figuring this out right alongside you, 1 episode at a time. So hit follow, and we will see you in the next one.